Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to Teaching with Power. This is Ben Wilcox, and I want to thank you for joining me this week. This week, I'm going to do something just a little bit different that I hadn't originally planned on. But with what's going on in the world right now and spending a lot of time at home, and so I figured I'd maybe share just a few brief thoughts this week to kind of get you ready and excited for General Conference this weekend. Because we are so lucky, we are so fortunate as a church to have these 15 prophets, seers, and revelators to help guide us and give us counsel in these last days. And I want to start out with a little story that my dad used to tell us when we were kids. When he was younger, he did grow up in the city in Southern California, but during the summers, his mother would send him out to her brother-in-law's cattle ranch in the middle of Nevada. And he learned a lot of really valuable life lessons out there, and he used to tell us kids these stories about what he learned. And they just became known as the ranch stories to us. And with each of these ranch stories, there was always a little saying, a moral of the story that he was trying to teach us. And these stories have just kind of become Wilcox family tradition. And I know that he could tell it much better than I can, but I'll do my best to share this with you. But I remember he would sit us down and he'd say, "Now kids, I want you to remember, old eyes see best. Old eyes see best." And then he'd tell us the story. On one day, they were moving a large group of cattle to the corrals for branding. And the ranch house and the corrals were kind of at the bottom of a little canyon. But there was one particular spot where the canyon walls gave way to more of a slope. Well, on one particular day, they were moving this large herd down the hill towards the corrals when one of the bulls in the group decided that he didn't like the looks of those corrals, and so he broke off away from the rest of the herd and started to run in the opposite direction. And so my dad's uncle, Uncle Verland, when he saw this, he motioned to my dad that was at the back of the herd to go and round up that bull and bring him back into the rest of the herd. And so my dad spurred his horse and started to race down the hill to pull him back in. Well, almost immediately as he started to make his way towards this bull, Uncle Verland waved his arms and had him stop. And so my dad pulled his horse to a stop. And then Uncle Verland motioned to one of his own sons to go to round the bull back into the herd. Well, in my dad's mind, he was thinking, Uncle Verland doesn't trust me. He doesn't think I'm capable of doing this. And so he decided in his mind, you know what, I'm going to prove that I can be just as rough and tough a cowboy as my cousins. I'm going to prove to him that I can do this. And so he spurred his horse and started to race down the hill again. Well, when Uncle Verland saw this, he started to wave his arms even more frantically to tell him to stop. But my dad was determined. He was going to do this. Well, the problem with that is that Uncle Verland could see something that my dad couldn't see. And that was the huge ditch between him and the bull that he was racing straight towards. And it wasn't until he was just almost on top of it that he could see it as well. And when he saw it, he tried to get his horse to stop, but it was too late. The horse's front legs fell into the ditch, pitching them both forward and tossing them to the ground, where that horse and my dad just started to roll down the hill. The horse going up on top and then dad underneath and then up and over and then down under again until finally they came to a stop, and as luck would have it, the horse right on top of him. Well, Uncle Verland comes running up the hill to come pick up the pieces of what's left. And very fortunately, my dad was not seriously injured in that fall. Although falls like that can be very, very dangerous. My dad was able to escape that incident with just some bruises and some wounded pride. But he said that he learned a very, very valuable lesson that day. And that was that old eyes see best. And that we needed to learn to trust the vision of those older eyes. And then he would say, kids, Heavenly Father has sent us some individuals who can see things that we can't see. And we need to learn to trust their counsels and their warnings. And those men and those individuals are called prophets. Prophets are special individuals who have been given a different perspective. They see things differently than we do. In the Old Testament, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 33, God compares Ezekiel to a watchman. He says, "So thou, O son of man, I have set thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore thou shalt hear the word at my mouth, and warn them from me." The prophets are watchmen on the tower. If you can envision that, you see them up there on their tower, and from their perspective, they can see the advancing troubles on the horizon. And so from their higher perspective, they look down to us at the bottom of the watchtower and shout out warnings. The enemy's coming. Watch out. And sometimes we look out into the distance and we say, what's he so worried about? I don't see any problems. What we've got to do is to learn to trust that they can see things that we can't. Now, the title that we usually use for these individuals is prophets, but they've got another title. And I really like this in Mosiah chapter 8, in verses 13 through 21. And Ammon here uses a different title for a prophet as he's explaining this to King Limhi. And the word is seer. He says that King Benjamin is a seer. In verse 15, and the king said that a seer is greater than a prophet. And Ammon said that a seer is a revelator and a prophet also. And a gift which is greater can no man have, except he should possess the power of God, which no man can. Yet a man may have great power given him from God. But a seer can know of things which are past, and also of things which are to come. And by them shall all things be revealed, or rather, shall secret things be made manifest, and hidden things shall come to light. And things which are not known shall be made known by them, and also things shall be made known by them which otherwise could not be known. Thus God has provided a means that man, through faith, might work mighty miracles. Therefore he becometh a great benefit to his fellow beings. And I love that word, seer. What is a seer? Well, you can really get a sense of it just by looking really closely at the word. Now, in the English language, if we want to describe somebody that does something, we just add an ER to the end of that word. So somebody who swims is a swimmer. Somebody who runs is a runner. Somebody who speaks is a speaker. But what about somebody who sees? They become a seer. But you can't have 3 E's in a word. So all we do is we just drop one of those E's and push it together, and that's where we get the word seer. A seer is somebody who sees. They see things differently than the rest of us. They see things that we can't see, and therefore they become a great benefit to us, like Ammon says. So whenever the prophets teach us something that maybe we don't totally understand or that doesn't seem to make sense, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that they see that we can't see? And we need to trust that what they see is true. So for example, back when my dad was young, if he ever said that he wanted to go see a movie or that he was going to go watch TV, his mom would say, "Hey, go have fun, enjoy the movie, enjoy the show." Nowadays, when my kids say they're going to go see a movie, they get the 3rd degree. Who are you going with? What's it rated? What's it about? And then I go online and I look at the parents' reviews on the movies to see what's going to go on. And why that difference? Well, because when my dad was a boy, the movies and the TV shows supported family values. Shows like Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver or I Love Lucy. You know, all these shows that would support and uphold our values. Well, who was the prophet at that time? David O. McKay. And one of his major messages, he really emphasized the importance of family. And no worldly success could compensate for failure in the home. We need to strengthen our families and hold to our values. And I know there were a lot of people who were kind of thinking, what's he so worried about? Our culture is all about family and family values. Well, he was a prophet. He was a seer, a watchman on the tower. What could he see coming in the 50s that maybe nobody else could? Maybe he saw the 60s and the 70s and all the way up into today, where everything would shift and change, where the media and the culture would no longer really support those family values. He was a seer. I remember President Hinckley, one of his major messages in almost every priesthood session, he warned the brethren about pornography and pornography use. And this was back before the internet really was a big deal. And what could he see that was coming? The increased availability and the permeation of pornography in our world through technology. He was a seer. He was a watchman on a tower. I think about the Family Proclamation when that came out in the early 90s. What could those brethren see that was coming? Again, an attack on family values and marriage and gender and our eternal identities. Well, look at the world today. That message, that foundation has been so important to some of the more challenging social issues that we face as a church today. And then just think about now, President Nelson and all the changes that the church has gone through recently. The changes in the youth program, home-centered, church-supported. And maybe sometimes we look at these things and we think, why is he making so many changes? Why do we have all these adjustments all of a sudden? And what I have to say is, well, he obviously can see something that the rest of us can't. There are coming issues, there are coming problems and challenges that the church is going to face. And he can see them. And he's warning us and he's preparing us for those things. And so we need to remember, old eyes see best. Trust the vision of seers. They're the watchmen on the tower. Another principle about prophets. Prophets are not always going to say things that are pleasing to the world. They're sometimes going to say things that are hard for us to accept. One of the best places that you can see this is in Acts chapter 27. And I love this little story. This is where Paul is being taken as a prisoner to Rome, and they start to sail across the Mediterranean Sea. And they stop for a time at a place called the Fair Havens on Crete. But the captain decides that that's really not the best place to spend the winter, but that they should just go a little more distance over toward Phoenix to spend the winter because it's more commodious there. And it's really not that far. But Paul warns them and he says, "Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with much hurt and much damage, not only of the lading in the ship, but also of our lives." Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenice, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. So you look at the situation. You've got the captain and the owner of the ship who's been sailing their whole lives saying, "Let's go." And Paul, who was a tent maker, but a prophet, saying, "No, we need to stay. We should not go." They've got to decide, who are they going to believe? The captain or the tent maker? So you look at this situation, you look at who's got more going for them. The captain of the ship who's saying to go, and you've got the majority of the people saying that they should go. The place where they're at really isn't the greatest place to spend the winter. The city of Phoenice is really not that far away, and they're going to just stay close to the shore, and the winds are blowing softly. Everything says it's okay to go. But there's Paul, the tent maker, saying we should stay. This is not a good idea. Well, what does Paul have going for him? The fact that he's a prophet, the fact that he's a seer, that gives him all the credibility in the world. Well, sometimes prophets are going to say things that aren't popular, that aren't commodious. Or there may be people out there who think that they know more than the prophet. Or there may be experts or people in their field who are saying things that are contrary to what the prophet's saying. The advice of financial experts that goes against the counsel of the prophets, or social experts, or nutrition or health experts, and they say things that don't match with the prophet's words. And so here we are having to decide, who are we going to follow? The captain of the ship, the master, and the majority of the people who want to do one thing? Or are we going to follow the tent maker? Are we going to follow the prophet? Well, what happens in the story? They loose from shore, and almost immediately a storm comes up, blows them off course, and they end up shipwrecked and almost dying. The only fact that they get saved is because they do start to listen to Paul and his advice in the story. We need to do the same kind of thing. We've got to heed the prophets, even when the experts or the majority of people or the conditions seem fine. It doesn't seem like it's a big deal. We need to follow and trust the prophet in those cases, even when his advice maybe isn't the most popular, or else we will probably be doomed to our own spiritual shipwrecks. One of my favorite descriptions of a prophet is in Moses chapter 6, verse 38, where the people are speaking of Enoch as a prophet. And it says, "They came forth to hear him upon the high places, saying unto the tent keepers, Tarry ye here and keep the tents, while we go yonder to behold the seer. For he prophesieth, and there is a strange thing in the land. A wild man hath come among us." I love that phrase, a wild man. Prophets are wild men. President Nelson is a wild man. And what do I mean by that? He can't be tamed. He is not going to be tamed by the voices and the criticism of the world, or even the members of the church. He's wild. You can't put him in a box and tell him what he's supposed to do. He receives revelation from the Lord, and he will allow nothing in the world to hold him back from teaching and standing up for those revelations. He's a wild man, even at age 95. I like this quote from Ezra Taft Benson. "You may not like what comes from the authority of the church. It may contradict your political views. It may contradict your social views. It may interfere with some of your social life. Your safety and ours depends upon whether or not we follow. Let's keep our eye on the president of the church." So my advice to you, listen to the tent maker rather than the captain in the more part. Or listen to the wild men, to the seer, to the watchman. And in doing that, we'll find safety from the shipwrecks of the world. Well, another little story that I like from the scriptures. This one comes from the Old Testament. It's the story when the children of Israel are traveling towards the promised land, and they're attacked by Amalek and his people. And Moses goes up on top of a hill and stretches out his arms to give the Israelites power. And as his hands are outstretched, the Israelites begin to win. But if you hold your arms out for too long, they eventually start to fall. And the people notice that as Moses' arms get heavy, that the Israelites begin to be pushed back. They start to lose. And so what do? Well, his brother Aaron and another man named Hur, they come up and they lift up Moses' arms and support his arms so that they can be held up indefinitely. And as they hold the prophet's arms up, the Israelites push Amalek and his man backwards, and eventually they win the battle. Well, that is one of my favorite images for a prophet, is seeing Aaron and Hur holding up those arms of the prophet. What's the message to me from that story? When we uphold the prophet, when we support him, we have added power in our lives to win our battles against our enemies. And I like to pair that story with another verse of Scripture from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, verse 22. And this verse tells us how we uphold the prophet, how we can be like Aaron and Hur to support our seers and our revelators. We learn from that verse that they are upheld by the confidence, the faith, and prayer of the church. Well, that's what I encourage you to do this weekend, to uphold our prophets with your confidence in their words, your confidence in them to give you good counsel, and to uphold them with your faith, that you believe they really are men of God, that they've been called to teach the things they teach, with faith to heed their counsel and believe in their promises, and then to uphold them with our prayers. Have you prayed for the brethren this week, that they'll be able to get their message across? Have you prayed for their well-being? Have you prayed for their families? Have you prayed for their strength? If we uphold the brethren in that same way, then I have confidence that we too will be able to win our battles against our adversaries. Well, I wanted to share a little story of something that happened to me when I was a young man, when I was just 12 years old, the day when I gained my testimony of living prophets. My dad would take me to the tabernacle for priesthood session. And it just so happened that he knew the head usher of the tabernacle, and he would get us front row seats for priesthood session, which was always really nice because the front seats were padded and you didn't have to sit on those hard tabernacle benches. And sometimes there were important people there too that would be sitting near the front. It was kind of cool for me as a deacon to have that experience and have the general authorities sitting right there in front of me. Well, on one particular occasion, this friend of my dad's, as we walked through the doors of the tabernacle, said, "Hey, do you think your son would like to sit next to Steve Young for priesthood session?" Now, for any of you that don't know, Steve Young is a famous football player, quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. And at this particular time, he had already been a Super Bowl champion, very famous, very well known, amazing football player. And he was one of my heroes. So I started to nod my head vigorously like, oh yeah, that would be so cool. And so we walked into the tabernacle, and there he was. There was this hero of mine, Steve Young, sitting right there. And I walked over and sat down right next to him. Oh, I was so excited. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be so amazing to go home and tell my friends that I sat next to Steve Young for General Conference. And I pulled out a little piece of paper that I had, and I asked him for an autograph, and he very graciously signed it for me. And I was just sitting there beaming and so excited. I almost couldn't even sense what was going on around me. But then, all of a sudden, everything changed. And the tabernacle just went completely silent, and everybody stood up. And you could feel that everything had changed in that space. There was a different feeling there. And so I'm still kind of looking up at Steve Young, just saying, oh my gosh, you're Steve Young, you're Steve Young. But I stood up too because everybody else had. But then I noticed that everybody was looking up at the front. And Steve Young was looking very intently up at the front. And so I just turned my head to see what everybody was looking at. And at that particular moment, Ezra Taft Benson was making his way into the tabernacle. And at this time, his health was very poor. I believe it was one of the last times he appeared in General Conference. And he was being helped in with President Hinckley on one arm and President Monson on the other, very slowly taking tiny little steps into the tabernacle. But I tell you, the spirit that frail body brought into the building just filled the immense space of the tabernacle with his spirit. I could feel it. I could feel a change in the room. And it was almost as if the Spirit was just communicating a very important message to me. Here I had Steve Young, popular, strong, very successful, and then this frail old man. But it was just as if the Spirit whispered to me, saying, Ben, this is your hero. This is who you want to be like. This is who you want to follow. Not the popular, strong, successful football player, but the little old man who's the prophet of God. That is who you want to follow. That's your hero. And I say that with no offense to Steve Young, who I could sense also had great faith in his prophet. Now, I still went home and told all my friends about my experience, but the greatest thing I walked away with that night from that experience was a strong testimony and faith in living prophets and their power and their connection with heaven. We are so lucky. We are so fortunate as members of the church to have these kinds of men as our leaders, who have the spirit of revelation, who have the spirit of prophecy, that lead us with such love and inspiration. They are men of God, and we would do well to listen carefully to what they have to say. And perhaps I'll just conclude with one final little story about President Nelson, the only time where I've had a personal experience with him. When my mom was dying from cancer, a mutual friend who knew President Nelson told him about our family situation, and he made a special effort and took the time to come out to our house just to visit our family. Now, this was before he was the prophet, but I was amazed that in his busy schedule that he would take the time to come and visit this individual family in the church. And he sat with us, and he talked with us, and he comforted us. And then he stood up and gave my mom a blessing. And I was able to stand in the circle and put my hands on his as he gave a beautiful blessing of comfort to my mom. That is one of the most special experiences of my life. And I can tell you with total confidence, President Nelson is a man of God. And I believe that he has been called to lead our church at this time for a very specific reason, and that he has a special connection with heaven, and that he loves each one of us in this church as individuals. And so do all of the other brethren as well. So with that said, I encourage you this weekend to listen closely to the seers, to the watchmen on the tower, to the wild men, and to uphold them with your confidence, with your faith, and with your prayers. And if we do that, the Lord will protect us from our enemies, and we will never be led astray. Well, I want to thank you for letting me share my thoughts and my testimony of the prophets today, and encourage you to watch and enjoy every session of General Conference this weekend.